and welcome to another episode of Disaster Empire Quick Views. This is the podcast where we talk to innovators and thought leaders in resilience. And it's taken a little while for us to coordinate, but finally we've gotten this podcast together. So I'm so excited to have Jorge Rodriguez with us. He's an emergency manager from El Paso. So thank you so much, Jorge, for being here today. So great to have you on the podcast.
Hello, Ashley. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I know we've been trying to get this on for some time, so it's good.
Excellent. So we're going to jump right in, and you're going to be talking about emergency management and leadership. And so my first question for you is, can you share your experience of what it's like being an emergency manager today?
I've started my career in the fire service. I've been on actively for about 24 years now. And the last 7, I've been in emergency management. But was fortunate enough to move up the ranks relatively quickly in these last few years, and I was assigned to head the Office of Emergency Management here in El Paso back in 2017. And I remember as a lieutenant, as a young lieutenant, I was helping develop a leadership course out of our training academy for our veteran firefighters, and I was doing research, and I came across a lot of these crisis leaders. And right around that time was when the Deepwater Horizon incident occurred. And I was just fascinated. I was fascinated by Admiral Ted Allen with the U.S. Coast Guard and with dealing with such a large and complex type of incident. And since then, I've been hooked. So my trajectory has always been, to land in emergency management. I've been doing this for the last 7 years, and that's where I'm at.
And what makes your work, as you've experienced it, maybe unique today versus what you might have observed, in the past?
Well, El Paso traditionally is not known for its natural disasters. We're in the high desert, far west Texas, and so we don't see a lot of that. But we have seen very border specific scenarios, incidents, and events that we've seen over the last 4 years that definitely have impacted us. I have to kind of paint the picture a little bit on our region. So like I said, we're geographically located in the furthest point of Texas, right? Far west. We're very isolated. We like to refer ourselves as an urban island. And, there's a lot of history here. We've been what's been termed the Paso del Norte region. People have been coming through this region for hundreds and hundreds of years. And another unique thing of our region is we're actually the largest binational metroplex in the Western Hemisphere. And so we have, when you look at the city of El Paso and in our county, we're right around maybe 840,000, but directly across the border is Ciudad Juarez, and they are a jurisdiction of 1.5 million people, so just double our size. Not only are we abutted against each other, the only thing that separates us is an imaginary line of an international border, and that separation is less than a half mile. So you have, and I like to illustrate this. Our city halls are actually less than a mile apart. So that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but that's that proximity is so close. So when we're sharing a border of 48 miles and you have limited capacity to assist each other, right? So we as a U.S. City, we can deploy resources into Mexico. Mexico can deploy resources to the U.S. So if there's incidents on each side of the border that can impact each of us, and those impacts can be immediate. So that's something we've worked through. I have my counterparts in Mexico, which is the Civil Protection Agency there, and so there's a lot of communication, but mainly it's to more of a warning and notification type of efforts and planning that we do here along the border. And so here, with the amount of trade that comes through, we have multiple ports of entry, and just very, very dynamic. A lot of homeland security concerns, but paradoxically, we're also one of the safest cities in the country. We've been on the top safest cities in the country for well over a decade. So beautiful place, beautiful mountains. The end of the Rocky Mountains in here bisects the city into two separate areas. So it's just beautiful sense. It's a great place to live, and but that's very 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 unique way. And I would say it's one of the most dynamic and complex environments to work in here along the border.
Thank you for that. So can you share, it really is a unique situation that you're experiencing as an emergency manager. Can you share with the audience some of the successes and the challenges that you have faced?
Yeah, absolutely. El Paso has gone through some very unique, some of them are tied to being on the border, and they're all interconnected in some way, but especially over the last 4 years, El Paso has seen multiple mass migration events. It's just like everyone else. We were impacted by COVID quite devastatingly. Border communities were hit especially hard. And then we also had a domestic terrorism attack here in El Paso in 2019 as well. So all of them are linked in some way, it's been challenging. So touching on the mass migration. So mass migration, and this is something I've been talking about. I've done I have a few conferences coming up that I'm going to be sharing this broader message to our crisis managers, our emergency managers in the country. Is we're seeing such a large movement of migration of people throughout the world. And what we've seen here locally has definitely we've been the epicenter of it since 2019. And then last year in 2022, we were faced with the largest numbers of migrants that were trying to come through our community. So we've been there on multiple times, and these mass migration events are very similar to types of things that you see in other types of disasters, right? So you think of the mass displacement of people, right? The need for mass sheltering, mass feeding. And so there's all these elements that from our agency, our goal was to provide that coordination across all of our partners, working very closely with NGOs who can play a critical role in this area. So we've worked through a lot of those challenges. At some point in December of last year, just to kind of give a little bit of an example of the scale, in December of 2022, we were seeing upwards of 10,000 migrants being processed and legally released by Customs and Border Protection into our community. So that's, and that happens on, what I want to talk about is, as emergency managers, and you see this throughout the country, right? You see Chicago, you see New York, you see other jurisdictions that are seeing the impacts of migration. There's, asylum seekers that are coming from all over the country, and from all over the world. And, our job is to be able to provide a humane way to give them, the basic needs, and ultimately just to help them get to the final destination.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a unique, as you said, experience and situations that you're dealing with in El Paso. And I don't think enough people are aware. And I'm sure there are many challenges that you're not sharing with the audience that you've experienced in that process. So I want to ask you, and this podcast is all about resilience. What does resilience mean to you?
The El Paso community has gone through over the last 4 years. I look at resilience and I see how each challenge we face, every disaster, every crisis, I look at us as an organization and as a city and as a people, right? And the way that I think about resilience is it's not so much about it being a recoil, right, to get back to where you are, but it's been a springing forward for us. There's something about when you apply that level of stress to the system, that shock, it's like it lifts, a lot of the blinders. It really opens up a lot of new opportunities that helps you completely rethink of how you were doing things previously. Through all these experiences that we've had, I see it's almost like an adaptive, evolutionary type of change that happens, not within individuals that are deep in the crisis, but also as a community. There's just something that changes. So everything that we've gone through over the last few years as a community, we were followed by one after the other. Mm. And these aren't short incidents. I mean, these are very long, protracted incidents that really require a lot of fortitude, a lot of stamina. And as a community, I've been able to witness how we continue to not just perform, but come back even better after each individual incident. So, there's some sort of psychological shift, I think, that happens within people. But ultimately, how do we, as emergency managers, as crisis leaders, how do we replicate that, right? Because it's very hard to create those real world events. But I'll give you an example. So in 2018, we had a complex coordinated terrorist attack, full scale exercises. This is one of the largest exercises that we did here in El Paso. We not only was it the full field response, with managing patients, with heavy law enforcement going after the assailant, and so we had all that play. But we also had the EOC components, and then we also exercised our Family Assistance Center. That was almost 1 year prior to our August the 3rd shooting, and I remember when I was standing in the EOC, seeing us on all the national media. And I remember just thinking, man, that this feels just like the exercise. And so, the point is we have to apply that stress. We have to elicit that emotion. And just like, I've been very active my entire life, but, it's like when you go to the gym and this principle called, progressive overload. And it's every time you go into the gym, you're trying to go up in weight, but that's ultimately what's going to elicit that growth. And I think that's from that focus into exercising, but really making them as realistic as possible is the only way that you can replicate. And it's from those that you're actually going to build that resilience. But bottom line, I think it all comes down to applying and stressing and shocking the system.
I think that's a great perspective, and I'm certainly on board with creating an exercise environment that helps us to understand, even though it's not exactly the same, what that stress is of an actual event. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting that you've had that experience and then had the actual event occurrence, right, and felt like they were at least somewhat the same. So hopefully that means your exercise designers are doing a good job in that avenue versus the opposite, which is never where we want to be as leaders. So in alignment with that, can you share from your perspective what you've experienced or in talking to your fellow emergency managers out there? What do you think the skills are that are needed to be successful today, right? Because that certainly evolves over time, although some of our base skills remain the same.
Well, I'll start with having an extremely deep curiosity, because in the environments that we work in, during the disaster, post-disaster, we deal with so many unknowns, and it's before you can even prompt yourself into action, it's about being able to have a deep curiosity as to what's happening. It's part of building out that situational awareness, right? But it's having that deep curiosity of how things work, why things are the way that they are, and so I think that sets the foundation for everything else. And I think just by nature, I think emergency managers are naturally, have that natural curiosity on how things work. The second thing I would say is critical thinking, creative problem solving. And a lot of that happens through, trying to gain as much operational experience as you can from an emergency management perspective, right? We take a step back. We're not in the tactical, but being able to gain as much of that operational experience and troubleshooting, problem solving. I think all of that lends itself to being able to function at this next level, that coordination level from the emergency management side of the house. And then I would say the last thing is being comfortable to operate in uncertainty, and these ties to my two previous points. Being comfortable to operate in uncertainty. We typically operate beyond standard operating procedures, right? And it's in that gray area where you have to remain adaptable, flexible, and as new information comes in, you should be flexible enough to be able to completely do 180 turn on your previous decisions, right? And being able to not stay so dogmatic or so fixated on one course of action, especially if you have new information. So I think all of that in a nutshell. And one add-on is, and I think that this has become an industry-wide issue, especially after COVID and, with just the sheer volume of crises and disasters that we've seen across the country. And that goes to wellness. And through my personal experience in El Paso and having such long, protracted incidents that last up to 6 months or more, and always being in that heightened state, it took me some time to be able to figure out what I needed to do to be the best version of myself, because that's what my team needed. That's what my community needed, is that I had to find a way to be able to thrive within that environment. So I think that's learning on how being able to provide self-care, providing the self-care for your team is, because especially with these types of incidents, everybody has to come in at their absolute best, and getting that sleep, eating the right food, staying hydrated are things that we usually throw to the back burner when we're
out the window.
Right. So
yeah.
that's I think is something that really has to become doctrine, I think, to that level where wellness has to be tied up into everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that message. There's no way that you can be resilient if you're not taking care of yourself first. And I always think, how well are you able to take care of others, which at the base level is what your job is, right? You're taking care of your community and your community members when emergencies happen. If you and your team are not doing the same and being those leaders, right? It's such a great message. I think in addition, your comment about flexibility and being agile and being able to pivot and not being too rigid in terms of a certain approach, because I can't imagine any emergency manager or any, crisis manager that doesn't have to do that, usually multiple times during an event, because new information comes in. And I think that's one of the biggest skills that is challenging to teach, but I think it comes, as you said, from experience, is having that comfort level with being able to make those changes on the fly with new information, or just being able to make decisions, knowing that you rarely have all of the information you want. So really all great messages. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Hey, as we close out today, I know you shared some of your bio, but is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience?
I think I'll close with this. I think border communities are very unique, right? And We saw that in COVID, our social vulnerability. We probably had one of the largest responses to COVID in the country. We were the epicenter of COVID, and there's just so many challenges along the border, the social vulnerability, the social determinants of health, but all of that ties in, back into the response to any type of disaster. So we have a good network of border emergency managers all the way from San Diego to Brownsville. We stay connected. But it is a very unique place. We always welcome everybody to come down and see for themselves this frontier and the terrain and everything else that we go through here locally. But no, actually, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for everything that you do for the community and for every crisis leader and emergency manager. I'm grateful for the work that you do.
And thank you so much and sharing that insight and that perspective, because I don't think everyone is aware you truly are on the front lines, of multiple events that have happened over the last few years. So I know I really appreciate that work, and I'm sure all of our colleagues out there do as well. How can people connect with you if they want to do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I also will be presenting at the National Homeland Security Conference, and later in the year, I'll be providing more information on another one. But topic of choice really is mass migration, and ultimately how that's going to be the next mega crisis for emergency management in the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking your time and coming onto the podcast. And I want to thank the audience as well. Please like and subscribe, because that's how you help this channel to grow. So thank you so much, Jorge, and hopefully we will connect again.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ashley. We'll see you soon.